Why does the US get slammed for deporting illegal immigrants, even by countries with harsher immigration laws? It's not just hypocrisy, it's about perception, power, and history. The US is seen as a global leader, and with that comes scrutiny. But is it fair? Let's unpack why the world reacts so strongly when America enforces its borders, even when others do the same, or worse. Many countries criticizing the US have immigration policies that are far more unforgiving. For example, Japan rarely grants asylum and detains undocumented migrants indefinitely. Australia detains asylum seekers offshore. Yet these nations face less global outrage. Why? The US is a symbol of freedom and opportunity, so when it deports people, it feels like a betrayal of its own ideals, even if others are more extreme. The US has long promoted itself as a nation of immigrants. The Statue of Liberty literally welcomes the huddled masses. This branding creates expectations. When America deports people, especially those fleeing hardship, critics say it contradicts its founding narrative. Other countries never claim to be immigrant havens, so they're judged by different standards. America's image makes it a target for moral criticism. Media coverage plays a huge role. U.S. immigration enforcement is highly visible. Images of children in detention centers or families being separated go viral. Other countries' actions often happen in silence or behind closed doors. The U.S. is under a global microscope, and every misstep is amplified. Visibility breeds criticism, even if the actions are similar to what other nations do quietly. There's also geopolitics. Many countries resent U.S. influence and use immigration criticism as a way to push back. It's easier to call out the U.S. than to fix their own systems. Some governments deflect attention from their own harsh policies by pointing fingers at America. It's not always about the migrants. It's about scoring political points on the global stage. Ironically, some of the loudest critics of U.S. deportations are countries whose citizens are being deported. They argue that the U.S. benefits from their labor and then discards them. But these same countries often have strict border controls and limited rights for immigrants themselves. The outrage is partly about economics. Remittances from migrants are vital to their economies, so deportations hit them hard. The U.S. is also a magnet for migration because of its economy and global reach. That means it deals with far more illegal immigration than many other countries. When it enforces its laws, the scale is massive, millions affected. That scale makes the actions more visible and controversial. Smaller countries deport quietly. The U.S. does it loudly, simply because of its size and influence. Some critics argue that U.S. foreign policy contributes to the migration crisis. Interventions in Latin America, for example, have destabilized regions, pushing people to flee. So when the U.S. deports them, it's seen as cleaning up a mess it helped create. This historical context fuels resentment and moral arguments against deportation, even if the legal basis is clear. Human rights organizations often focus on the U.S. because it's a democracy that claims to uphold liberty and justice. They expect more from it. When authoritarian regimes deport people, it's tragic but unsurprising. When the U.S. does it, it feels like a betrayal of democratic values. The higher the moral ground you claim, the harder the fall when you're seen as failing. There's also a cultural factor. American pop culture, movies, music, TV, sells a dream of inclusion and opportunity. People around the world grow up believing in the American dream. Deportation shatters that illusion. It's not just a legal act, it's a symbolic rejection. That emotional disconnect between the dream and the reality fuels global outrage, even if the law is being followed. Some countries use U.S. deportations to rally domestic support. Leaders frame America as a villain to distract from their own failures. It's a classic political move: externalize blame. By criticizing the U.S., they appear to defend their citizens abroad, even if they mistreat immigrants at home. It's not about justice, it's about optics and political survival. The U.S. also has a unique legal system that allows for public scrutiny. Court cases, media access, and freedom of speech mean that deportations are documented and debated. In many countries, immigration enforcement is opaque. The transparency in the U.S. invites criticism, but it's also a strength. It means the system can be held accountable, even if it's not perfect. Some critics genuinely care about human rights and see U.S. deportations as part of a broader global issue. They're not just singling out America, they're using its visibility to highlight a problem that exists everywhere. In this view, the U.S. is a case study, not a scapegoat. The goal is reform, not blame. But that nuance often gets lost in the noise. The U.S. is also home to a massive diaspora. When deportations happen, they affect families, communities, and economies across borders. That ripple effect makes the issue international. Other countries react not just out of politics, but because their citizens are directly impacted. It's personal. And when people feel personally attacked, they speak out, loudly and emotionally. In some cases, the criticism is strategic. Countries want to negotiate better terms for their citizens, more visas, less deportation, more aid. Publicly criticizing U.S. immigration policy is a bargaining chip. It's not always about principle, it's about leverage. The louder the outrage, the more pressure they hope to apply. It's diplomacy through public shaming. The U.S. also has a long history of racialized immigration enforcement. From the Chinese Exclusion Act to the Muslim ban, critics argue that deportation policies often reflect deeper biases. When people see certain groups disproportionately targeted, they question the motives. It's not just about legality, it's about equity. That history adds fuel to the fire of international criticism. Social media has globalized outrage. A deportation in Texas can spark protests in Europe within hours. Hashtags, viral videos, and influencers amplify every incident. The U.S., being a media powerhouse, is especially vulnerable to this. Other countries may act similarly, but without the same digital footprint, they escape the spotlight. America's visibility is both a strength and a liability. Some argue that the U.S. sets the tone for global norms. When it deports aggressively, it gives cover for other countries to do the same. Critics worry that U.S. actions normalize harsh treatment of migrants worldwide. So they push back hard, not just to protect those in America, but to prevent a global domino effect. It's about setting a moral precedent. Despite the criticism, many countries quietly cooperate with U.S. deportations. They accept returnees, share data, and even receive aid in exchange. Publicly, they condemn the practice. Privately, they benefit. It's a double game, one for the cameras, one behind closed doors. The outrage is real, but it's also strategic. Everyone's playing politics, including America's critics.